Okay. So you are our last person in our series on exploring artificial intelligence. And this is Claire Fisher, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Great. Thank you for having me. I have a few slides I'll put up in a minute, and then a couple different Google Docs that I'm going to share with you that are sort of like aggregated resources. But this is really your time, so feel free to interrupt, ask questions, and I think because it's such a small group, we can really make this a more kind of customized way to support you where you're at. And I also recognize I'm sitting between you and all the other things on your to-do list. So thank you so much for being here. It's such an honor for me. You are driving the work, and if I can be helpful in any way, that's kind of why I'm here. I recently transitioned out of my role, but previously I was leading AI strategy for our system on behalf of our foundation and the chancellor's office. And so that was content strategy, sort of like creating a cohesive understanding about how can AI help us with our pre-existing challenges and persistent challenges that we face, that students face, that our institutions face, and then creating a roadmap and kind of a mechanism for implementation. And a lot of the work that we were doing was honestly listening and learning. I tried to talk to as many students, faculty, department chairs, presidents, chancellors, CTOs, CDOs, like as many people as I possibly could in our system and across the country to understand what the needs were, to try to drive, like AI can help with anything, rather than following kind of the shiny object or like the hammer in search of a nail, being really rooted in what it is that you're trying to do all day, every day, and how we can create a space or resources to support you with that. And what we ultimately ended up with was a lab or a space for you, other faculty, students, leaders to co-design alongside startups, other types of tools providers, literacy organizations, enterprise SaaS companies, like anybody who might want to partner with our system who could help us or help you make tools or resources, a space for that. That was really driven by your needs. Also really helpful to these tools in the market who otherwise are designing without you in mind. And so that's kind of where I come from. I seek to be helpful and to really listen to what you're needing. And what I put together when Lori and I spoke was just kind of a brief but interactive session on here. We'll go through. I'm going to send you a couple docs in the meantime, but is the slideshow view better? Probably. Oops. Okay, so put together a couple slides, but this is really a conversation, so please feel free to make it interactive. As per the kind of documents that Lori sent ahead of time, this is about sort of 3 components that we heard were the most critical from you and your peers in this space. That's literacy building, that's coalition building, and that's tools. Literacy is, PD, and I guess I'll just go to, this was the kind of the session outline, but sort of 3 different ways to think about educating yourselves and your peers, banding together, creating a train the trainer model or a space where you can drive things and learn alongside others, and tools. We sort of know that it's not like if you build it, they will come. Like if there's a great tool, it solves everything. Like it is really about literacy building and coalition building first, and then really picking the tools that will help you in your problem of practice. Here are the goals that, based on my conversations with Amanda and Lori, felt really important. 1 is to understand what your priorities are. 2 is to share what opportunities I'm seeing in kind of these 3 areas. Make sure that you have an understanding of what's available to you, how you might use it, how you keep getting help from me. This is kind of step 1. And that you also know what each other is thinking about to the extent that that's useful to you moving forward. It seems like a really collaborative environment. And so I think if you're working on something and then somebody else in your department or in your institution is working on something else, and you can kind of trade notes, that feels useful as a way to sort of divide and conquer your experimentation. And then we're going to do a warm-up activity, which hopefully will help you share any other goals you have for this session too. What I'm hoping for you each to share is your name and your role. And I know we just did brief intros, so feel free to skip whatever you've already shared. Something irrespective of AI or technology that's keeping you up right now in your role. And one word that describes how you feel right now, and one word that describes how you hope to feel by the end of this. And if you can, yes, Jim, I would love for you to go. And then maybe you can call on the next person.
Okay.
Was it a hand for volunteering? Was it a hand for?
I'll go first. Yeah.
Okay.
So Jim Mulligan, my tutorial coordinator. The biggest thing keeping me up at night, well, my work doesn't keep me up at night, thank goodness. But the things I think about while I'm awake here are the impact that AI is already having on education in general, but because of my area, specifically tutoring, and how are we going to harness that? Because it's being used. And so I want to use it well, ethically, to its best advantages, etc.
Yep.
And then one word to describe how you're feeling about coming into this. I mean, I'm a little excited because I do like learning about technology stuff. But like I said right before we started, it's moving hyper fast, it seems like. So I'm a little bit worried about keeping up. And one word to describe how you hope to feel coming out of today's meeting, you mean?
Yeah.
Knowing everything I need to know. Just kidding.
Ambitious. I like it. Thank you.
Here, I'll go next since I know Carrie is eating. What's keeping me up at night? That's way too big of a question. I'm gonna skip that.
Intentionally open-ended. More just to think about, like, sort of, if you had 10 more hours in the week, what would you do?
I mean, work-wise, contracts, planning PD, planning the right PD, getting people, how do you get people to come to professional development, especially because I've had, put on great things. Those are work-wise things that keep me up at night. I feel like nervous when it comes to AI, as in, am I doing it right as far as helping students? And I've done teeny little things in my class, but hardly anything. But it's like, if I venture into doing more, will I be doing it right? Will I be forgetting things that I need to add to it? And one word to describe how you hope, I hope to come out feeling hopeful.
Thank you.
Carrie, you want to unmute?
I'm sorry to interrupt your lunch. You can also do it
No,
later.
perfect timing. I just finished wolfing it down.
Amazing.
So no worries. So Carrie Carley, an English instructor and chair for art, music, and English. Like Lori, I have those other duties that kind of not necessarily keep me up at night, but make, wake up remembering, like, oh my God, the schedule I was supposed to work on and I still haven't gotten there, and things like that, and all those emails from people, from faculty and things. But with AI, what keeps me up with that is that just frustration that the way I see AI, the way I believe AI has been used so far in my classes, because of course we know there's no great detector or anything out there, is that students not trusting themselves. And that is very frustrating to me as an instructor, that they don't trust themselves to have something important to share and to write about, and to trust their own voice and their own ability to write, and not seeing value in it. So coming into this, I'm a little frustrated by that. And I hope to come out of it feeling hopeful with some tools or ways to perhaps harness AI in some way, or to have my students trust themselves as writers.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
How's it going?
Susie's around.
Can you guys hear me?
Daniel, amazing. Yes.
Yeah, so I teach information systems at the college. So you know, I just kind of want to learn as much as I can. I listen to podcasts. I kind of know what's going on. I mean, maybe I don't know the whole picture because there's so much of AI that's, a lot of it's going on right now. So I kind of want to see a different perspective. I'm looking at it from the business perspective, but I kind of want to see it from more from other perspectives. I'm here to learn. There's a bunch of tools out there. It could be overwhelming. It doesn't keep me up at night, but I could see that it's an overwhelming topic. I could see that it's a topic that, if in education, if we're not ready for it, it's gonna. I mean, it's an impactful thing. So just kind of staying on top of it and learn as much as possible. That's what that's the goal for me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all for sharing this. Will drive our time together. So we're going to spend time talking about literacy building, coalition building, and tools. Literacy is the education and awareness, the mindset shifts. Coalition building is the mobilization, building capacity, building leadership, and tools is kind of what I think about as the third. When you have a good understanding and you understand your network and your organization, those are places then where engaging with tools is really helpful. So hopefully that addresses all of what you're talking about, where I just heard, pieces of each of this, like how do we make sure that people feel like this can benefit them? It's not black and white. Very real concerns about students using it in a more transactional way. How do they trust themselves? How do you kind of foster that environment? And so I will just say some of those things, especially Carrie, what you mentioned, those are really big challenges, and you're doing the hard work every day. And maybe we can create a space here to engage a little bit in how you might create more of a kind of writing process-based approach. But I also just want to say, when coming in, I used to be an educator. I'm not currently an educator. I come from a place of trying to be helpful and build resources, not sort of saying there's an easy fix to any of this. I think these things are meaty and challenging. So I just also invite you to push back, drive the conversation, share with each other. And that this is kind of the first of many conversations that you have. And I'm also around to remain helpful. Thank you so much. So first is literacy. And I'm going to send you a document in a minute that I'm going to have you poke around. And I think because it's such a small group, we can just dive into a couple things that are interesting to the group. But if it were bigger, I would probably have you split into groups or do kind of an individual deep dive. So feel free to do that later. There are resources that are speakers, people who could come join you. I'm sure, Lori, that you brought a number of them in this kind of week. There are also asynchronous courses. I'm sure you may have seen some of the ones from inside the system, and also maybe, Coursera or Google or any of those things that have come across your desk that are pretty easy ways just to engage or send them to peers or, other folks, Susie, that you mentioned who maybe aren't bought in yet. Then there's other like a series of speakers or PD and other professional learning communities, like sort of coalitions. Some of them are on the list, not all of them are. So if you want to follow up with any one of these, and the questions for each section, including this one that I want you to be thinking about, are what are your priorities? What have you tried? What have you liked? What do you want to try next? So what I'm going to do is send you the first document, which is kind of a collection of literacy, let's see, resources. You should all be able to access it, but let me know if you can't. I'll walk us through it, and then what I would say is we can just spend a few, I think we'll spend probably 10 minutes on each section. So we'll just scratch the surface, but this is really for you to, like the verticals are ones that I've just kind of identified in conversations with the field. There is some fluidity across some tools enablement or coalition building includes literacy building. But literacy building, I would just think about as anybody that might increase your understanding or your exposure to this stuff. There's some experts, there's some educators, there's some people within the system. I'll walk us through the document, and then I might just say, like, ask questions, push in places that are priorities for you, and we can do a bit of a deep dive. And let me know if you haven't been able to access this. So these are the courses or resources that are asynchronous. Some of them are like a series of classes, like the Google Essentials courses. Some of like Sarah Schwetman's a leader at MIT. This is just a Google Doc presentation that she created that has some really helpful infographics. So again, this is not complete. There's some videos. Some of them are about ethics. Some of them are about literacy, but kind of like whatever dimension feels most important to you. The second is speakers and their attached organizations who are incredibly engaging, much better at this than I am. And some of them you may know, some of them have newsletters. I would encourage you to sign up for a number of these, especially Ethan Mollick's and the Grail newsletter. For example, Isabel Howe runs the Stanford Accelerator for Learning. They do workshops on Hugging Face, so they can help you, which is an open source kind of aggregation of tools. And it's the Graduate School of Education. They run you through a bunch of these tools. This is all just sort of so you can say, oh, it would be great to have these people come to our school. It would be great to bring these people to our class, to, you know, whatever the place would be. And then there are some other faculty, some of whom you may know, who are doing a lot of PD building themselves. This list is by no means complete. And I imagine many of your leaders are doing the same thing. So feel free to send me more names that I can add. There are also system leaders who I think are driving a lot of literacy building in their institutions, and other resources. These are all newsletters. And then the last is this kind of cobbled together perspective, like a scrappy fellowship. If you were to find, you know, if you were to say, okay, we have an AI fellowship, it is a year-long thing. We go to a couple free conferences together, we read a couple books, we do a couple PD sessions, we visit a couple companies, whatever it might be. This was just like sort of a straw man at what it might look like to engage not just in literacy building, but then it also kind of helps coalition building, your internal champions, and tools if you look at a couple tools together. Let me just pause. Questions, places where, you know, based on your priorities, it would be helpful to do a deep dive.
I don't know if this is relevant here. So you can, maybe it's relevant somewhere else, but one thing that just sort of popped into my head is, and this came off of a student panel too, is that in industry, outside of academia, people are now maybe using AI in their work. So how can we help our students learn AI that they might use in some sort of industry or a job outside of, I mean, whether it's a real estate agent or graphic designing or something. I just, that popped into my head. So I just
Yeah.
thought I'd throw that out there. Like, how can we prepare our students for work, industry work in our classes while still, like with English, still maintaining learning how to write?
So that's a really great question. That spans all of these things. What I would say is there are a couple places in here where you can stitch together resources to be helpful in those things. And then I'll talk to you about like what I think the limitations are, because what you're saying is super important. And I actually think there's some holes in what resources exist in the field right now. There's a lot of rhetoric. There are a lot of reports on like the labor market changing and how this changing jobs and all this stuff, which is interesting and helpful, but also like where's there a good prompt engineering class? Or like, what does this mean for, like you said, data analytics or digital design, or, you know, all these places where I think the big headline here is that AI can democratize access to skills, and our institutions exist to deliver immediate career-aligned value to students. And, you know, in each of your courses, whether it's a writing course or, you know, IT, there are ways that like all these different skill sets are changing as it relates to jobs. So I think what you're thinking about is really, really important. I wish I had a better set of resources for you. As they evolve, I will let you know, but I would say first, pick a couple of these. So you could say that even like Google's 10-hour AI Essentials course, maybe that's part of your first unit. Or you have students look through and they pick two and then they do a deep dive and then they talk to each other about, you know, or like I think before they engage in prompt engineering, I think first having a bigger understanding about like why this stuff matters and how it can help them both with productivity and with enhanced engagement will be really helpful. So I think the best ones are the Coursera ones and the Google 10-hour one. NVIDIA has some. The others are like a bit more, they're like short videos, or they're, you know, like the EDUCAUSE resources will be helpful to you, but you're probably not going to want to send them to students. Then there are a couple speakers that are very, very practical. So if you were to say, actually, this is like making sure students have access to what this means for them is important. And those people are, I mean, I think Alex Cotran is just really good as a generalist. So he would be good to work with faculty to get them ready to engage in the question you're asking. Then I would say the others, I think Denise Pope at Stanford, Isabel and Josh at Stanford, because they do more practical workshops, like how do you use these tools? And you could convince them to do it for students as well. And Todd McLeese will be the most useful. Then there are people like Matthew Raskoff at Stanford is running something with Foothill right now called Code in Place, where he has had educators at Stanford build an AI-enabled CS computer science course, and they're working with Foothill. They want to, it's going really well. They want to expand. They have a relationship where it means students get credit at Foothill. And so there are things like that where they're doing a ton of that in a CS context. If you wanted to do this kind of across courses, they're not going to be the best person for you. I think I wish there were really strong prompt engineering courses. I'm not seeing them yet. I'm seeing much more rhetoric on changing labor market than on, okay, what does this mean for what you do tomorrow? Mira Costa has an AI degree that they recently launched. So they might be worth talking to as well, just to sort of see, did they build, I actually think you could build a prompt engineering course fairly quickly, or even just ask ChatGPT how could you become a data scientist more quickly now? What does that mean for what I think you could hack your way into a lot of these, but I wish that there were a better answer for you. I think it's like part literacy building in this stuff, and then part figuring out where there might be other good prompt engineering courses. But thanks for asking. Other questions on? The other thing I would say is that, and this will come up in tools, Yusuf Ahmad runs an organization called PlayLab. It's one of the only nonprofit technology companies in this space. They, I think, do all three categories: literacy, coalition building, and tools enablement. They run professional learning communities where they have infrastructure that they've built, and educators build their own custom GPTs based on their problem of practice. And so if you were to bring them in to do a focused, career alignment for students session, or even a generic one, and you just know that many of your leaders are going to want to engage that way, I think it's not packaged, like this would be educators building things themselves, but that would be a space where you could bring Lori your question and say, a number of our educators really care about making sure students are prepared, and then kind of build from there. Any other questions on this? Feel free to, this document is yours, so feel free to dig around after and follow up with me if anything else comes up. And I know that many educators, like Anna Mills, I know, has her own resource list. So again, I think this is just a beginning, but important as a kind of foundational place that, like, Lori, you had said, how do we have more people come to these meetings? I think there are ways maybe to meet people where they are with some of these resources. But I think you'll probably drive a lot of that. So then the second piece, and again, I know we're moving quickly, is coalition building. We don't have a document for that. We will for tools. So I'll just stop screen sharing in a second. But I think one thing I have, like all of this stuff, like Daniel, you mentioned, is overwhelming. There is an unending number of resources, people who are becoming experts, who are, becoming speakers and all of these things, that it's hard to figure out what's noise and what's useful to you. I think the leadership mobilization is such an important piece of this. If you got to the end of this year and as an institution, every single one of your educators and classified staff had some lightweight exposure to AI through the PlayLab PLC, through a series of speakers, through, something becoming part of onboarding. Those are the types of things that shift mindsets. And I think a lot of the literacy building that meets people where they are, there's sort of, in my experience, this group of leaders who are excited and ready and self-starters. Then there's a group in the middle who's like, I don't know, I could go either way. And then there are people who really feel fearful and are pretty reticent to any of these shifts. And I think, everybody's journey looks different, but if you build out some train the trainer model where you kind of have your early adopters driving a lot of the tools work and a lot of the literacy work, and then you have more kind of opportunities for them to share with peers, that helps move the middle group in a way that I think I've seen be effective in other places. And I think the fact that you're investing in these weeks of PD is incredible. Like, you have so much to do, and this being a priority is meaningful to your institution. I've seen things go well at an internal department level, institution level, even system-wide level. I think there are different layers. There are also some interesting initiatives at the state level, outside of the system, and nationwide. For example, Arizona State University University has something called the University Design Institute, and they are all about bringing in institutions to across the country, and they run these like communities of practice or coalitions. I've seen, you know, different faculty within Glendale or Santa Monica College or a number of other institutions build out a faculty scope and sequence where faculty are training other faculty. I think anything that moves the flywheel a little bit, either internally or externally, I've seen to be very effective. And I'm curious, you know, how this resonates with you, what you've tried, what's been hard, where you're seeking resources there. You are muted.
Yeah, I thought I unmuted. I'm like the train the trainer, I think is really interesting. We have an well, you know, I don't know if you know Amanda. She's our instructional designer. So so
Yes.
she even helped me with some AI stuff. So she definitely is a resource for other people. But I like that idea of training other people. And so a lot of the people I got for the last 2 weeks, this week and last week, were people who are using it in their classrooms to sort of show how they're using it in their classrooms. And I would like to do more PD where we do more of a showcase. So even having like a community of practice, which is where I'm taking this, where people might showcase or talk about how they're nervous or something. And so I think that this would go more smoothly for some people if they knew there were resources on campus who they could ask for help. And you know, maybe beyond one person, because one person can only do so much. So I'm really interested in exploring that, because that's how I learn, is by hearing what other people are doing.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you are all so busy day to day that it is really helpful to have a space outside of your, you know, putting out fires, to be able to think about these things, try things, and share. And maybe even, you know, that like year-long fellowship idea in the first kind of literacy document. Like you can formalize anything. I mean, I think you could create within this group, within, you know, any other attendees who are kind of going to be the early adopters here, and create a set of resources for them. And maybe like you are part of the fellowship for this year, and you do the Play Lab PLC, or you have a couple speakers come in, you each commit to trying a handful of tools. There are a number of tools providers, which we'll get to in a minute, who would like give you licenses for free, are super excited to pilot, would want to work with you in depth. You could each pick a different one. You could build your own custom GPTs, but I think formalizing something that gives you resources and establishes you as leaders in this space, and then you can create the kind of bigger concentric circles. Maybe then you share your tools with each other and then with the broader faculty, or you spend this year really just learning and doing, you know, in a small group, and then next year is all about bringing more people into your orbit. I think some tiered system works pretty well, where you don't have to make everybody do everything right away. But if you said everybody's going to go to 2 PD sessions as part of their onboarding or their mid-year, I don't know what the different cycles you have are, but some structure like that. If you feel like your context is too politicized, you can do it externally. You know, statewide, there are organizations like the Educational Learning Lab. If any of you applied to the AI FAST grants, they work with a number of faculty across CSU and UC within the state. Like that can be a helpful place, so you're out of your context, and then maybe you can come back and share with, you know, with Readly. There are also national organizations like the ASU, when I mentioned, like the PNBR, Education is a venture studio. There are a couple others, and a couple other grant organizations. Like some of those can be forcing functions if you all applied together to do something or wanted to launch a lab. I think the mobilization piece of all of it is almost like more important than what you build, because you then built this infrastructure where you have each other to rely on. And I know you already do this in many different ways. Axon Collaborative and GitLab Foundation have new grants that are coming out.
What are those?
Axim, AXIM, they were started from the sale of edX by Harvard and MIT. And they started a foundation, and they do a lot of grants and coalition building. And then GitLab is a foundation who is also doing something similar. They, in my experience, have like tended to move pretty quickly. Learning Lab is another great one in state. And I think CAMBIAR Education, CAMBIAR, the Education Design Lab, ASU's University Design Institute. These are different, and I can send you a list of this after too. These are sort of different organizations. Some do funding, some do coalition building, that if you were sort of like, it's actually not important to us that we're building something for the system. We want to do this outside of the system and be free to learn from people from other states. It sort of depends on what you want. And separately, there are educators at Glendale and Foothill De Anza, and probably a number of others, but those come to mind, who've done a faculty PD train the trainer model and are launching it this year. They sort of tried stuff last year and are launching this year, and maybe talking to them would be helpful to see kind of how you can either divide and conquer or share best practices or whatever else.
That's great. I feel like I'm monopolizing, so anyone else who has a question, please.
Do you feel, to others in the group, is this lonely? Like what does effective collaboration or support look like for you? Maybe just open question then. If things come to you over time, feel free to bring them back up or reach back out. And I know this is, of the three, probably like the squishiest area. But I think regardless of what you do, figuring out ways to experiment and to try things, and then to share what you're trying with people who might be thinking similarly, or maybe are scared, and you taking the first step is really helpful. And then I think because this involves so much risk taking, if you can formalize or create prestige or community around this initial group of leaders, that gives, I know you do this in a lot of other ways, but I think like whether it's financial or like social capital or anything, just to kind of continue to drive the work really helps. So you don't feel like you're, standing out alone trying new things. Okay, I'm gonna now share, let's see. We're gonna talk about tools, and I'm gonna share a document in a second. But there are sort of 4 areas for tools enablement. And these are all external organizations. There's some overlap. So like some founders of companies are really great speakers and they also speak. Some do coalition building as well. Student supports, think about like sort of anything that increases persistence, counseling, etc. More data on retention, on student engagement behavior. Teaching and learning is anything that is either sort of specifically academic or a partner to your practice. Workforce and career services. Some of that, Lori, might be what you're looking for, but I think a lot of it's going to be, job matching or some kind of broader like navigational support for students. And then administrative infrastructure might not be relevant for you, but like data systems and some of the kind of bigger back-end questions, I actually think enable some of the front-end pieces. And so some of that might be relevant to you too. And we'll just zoom in wherever is most helpful to you, but then you'll have these documents, you can share them with whomever else is useful. And this landscape's changing a ton. We just did a bunch of market research. I'm gonna send you 2 documents. One is like a tools repository in each of these areas, probably has 10-ish per area. So the hope here was to clear a lot of the noise. There's so much going on in the space. I'm sure a lot of like tools providers reach out to you, and we determined these kind of 4 key areas based on all the conversations we had with leaders in our system and what they were asking for, and wanted to create a little bit of focus so that you could engage with some of these things rather than feeling like, oh my gosh, there are 100 on this list. Where do I even begin? The second document I'm going to send you is an evaluation document. So how might you evaluate these things so that you create like sort of a clear scorecard and a clear process for your institution? All that is super important too. It's a straw man, so feel free to shift it in whatever way you need. And then my questions for you kind of per the others are sort of like, what are your priorities? What have you tried? What have you liked? What do you want to try next? Because then we can do a deep dive in kind of any one of these tools. Okay, so there are 2 documents I'm going to just share in the chat. You should have access to them. These are the tools, and then the second doc is the eval and other resources around evals. Anybody not able to access? Okay, I'm not going to go through the eval. It is fairly self-explanatory. What I will say before I share the tools list is with the eval, I think if you're going to do anything, it's important just to make sure that it meets certain criteria and that it's student outcomes focused. And I think you have a lot of power in saying to these vendors or these early stage technology providers, like, these are the things that are really important to us. Please like design for us. A lot of them are early stage, and so they're going to want to work with you. And the scorecard allows you to be pretty explicit and direct about and transparent, and you could share these across your institutions. You could formalize a process around evaluations, etc. We used a bunch of things that higher ed traditionally uses, and then new things based on the fact that it's kind of a new industry. Okay, and then there are a bunch of different tools, and I imagine the teaching and learning ones might be the most interesting to you, but I think some of the student support ones probably also are useful. Any like thoughts on your priorities, places where you're like, oh, I've heard of Chiron. Can you tell me more about that? Otherwise, I would probably just encourage us to pick one and do a deep dive for today. And then you maybe could structure time later to go through more. And I'm also happy to answer any more questions about any of them. This is like the most kind of bare bones. And, Carrie, if you're sort of like, is there something with writing? Can we talk more about that? Any kind of priorities you have, feel free to surface them here.
I have a question. Have you have you played with Conmigo?
I have. Have you?
I've heard of it. I listened to this podcast. He was a guest about Con, and he pretty much just talked about he talked about his book. He's the guy from Khan Academy, and he's working with I believe Microsoft to create, this kind of like this tutor, right? I kind of want to know inside of your insight and what your experience was. I mean, during the podcast, he says so many good things about it, but I'm not 100% sure whether it delivers.
Yep. I appreciate you bringing that up. Anybody else here know of Conmigo or have played around with it?
Is that through the Khan Academy?
Yes.
I think I looked at, I felt like maybe it had, like I might have learned about it right when it was coming out and it hadn't quite come out, or you had to pay for it or something. So I didn't do anything with it. But yeah, I don't really know any of those that you have on your list.
Amazing. That's fun. That's more, we'll dive in. So, Conmigo, actually, before we hop in, anybody else tried it? Know anything about it? So Khan Academy, Sal Khan runs Khan Academy. Daniel, I think he's the person you heard. He just wrote a book called Brave New Words. It's a good book. If you, again, like start the book club or something, worth reading. He's like, does a lot of TED Talks. He's a pretty incredible speaker now. He started Khan Academy as like, lessons on YouTube to teach his niece math. So he built this kind of set of courses. It's a nonprofit, which is atypical of a lot of these startups and technology companies. So PlayLab and Conmigo are kind of two of the only, there's some AI EDUs a nonprofit, but many of them are for profits. Khan Academy is a tutoring platform. So it, or not necessarily a tutoring platform. It has courses, mostly K-12. They expanded to SAT and just like career pathways and some higher ed, but really strong numeracy and literacy curriculum. And they built basically an AI tutor called Conmigo on top of their content. And so it works best with Khan Academy content, but you can use it with anything because it's fairly generic. It is also, they've integrated with Instructure and Microsoft. So as a 365 customer, you might be able to access it. And in Instructure, which is Canvas, which I think you all use, you also might be able to access it. You can go to their website and create an account for free, but as a pass-through for students. That's why it's on Canvas. I would encourage you to try it. I think it is a very good chatbot. It's also a chatbot. We could have a longer conversation about, are those going to revolutionize education? Is a student who's struggling the most going to be asking the questions, or, do we need better kind of nudge interventions to bring students into that work? But I think it's really good, and I think it would be worth trying. They are also a really savvy team. The chief learning officer is great. So I think the people driving things are really committed to the right things and want you to be engaging in this and part of it. I think they struggle with, any of the same limitations of a chatbot. But often students are working, asynchronously, or they have jobs and they need to get their questions asked after hours when faculty aren't available. So I think there are a number of these that like increase your ability to serve students just sort of at all hours of the day. Chiron Learning would be another one that's like that. They create videos that are sort of like sentiment videos. So you as a faculty member could say, here are different places where we think students are going to struggle, and it'll create videos of you that help address student misconception and talk to students. So it's like sort of a more dynamic chatbot. Carrie, I would look at Ethically for writing. That breaks up writing into more sort of scaffolded parts. So it's much more about process and feedback than it is about product.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And Atypical, I would also look at, it is, so whereas PlayLab might be more customizable and Conmigo might be a tutor chatbot, Atypical is sort of like a one-stop shop for faculty. You can do content generation, you can do assessments. It's very dynamic. They're very early stage, but they're really great. They want to pilot with us, so I would. I don't know if you can sign up for an account. If you can, you should. If you're interested in kind of an institutional pilot, we could also talk to them about that too. And I know we're almost at time and we could probably spend much longer doing a deep dive. I would just say all of these are good options. They've met certain criteria in terms of the experience of their leadership teams, their mission, their outcomes, their ability to meet certain needs that we heard from faculty. So I would look at those and, you know, use your own evaluation or this evaluation to grade them if you decide as an institution you want to kind of do a deep dive. But it's packed with a lot of information. So feel free to check it out and then kind of reach back out to me after. And I know we only have a couple more minutes, whether it's about tools or anything else. I just sort of created a last slide about what's resonating, what direction might you want. Maybe this started a lot more kind of questions, ideas than answers. But just know that this is my email. Feel free to reach out to me, just to introduce yourself or make sure I have your email, or if you want any more help. And hopefully these are just sort of buds, because I think whether you want to heavily index on the tools or one tool, or building a coalition, or doing, you know, a speaker series or like literacy training, there are lots of places that you can take this. And I think the fact that you're all here and you're engaging and curious mean that you're already kind of, 5 or 10 steps ahead.
I'm wondering, I'm assuming Jim probably had students come in or something, but I'm wondering if there is a good AI tool for tutors or a good chatbot for tutors. That I can imagine that might be a question you have and our writing center has. I don't know, just thinking about it.
I would say that Conmigo is a pretty good tutor. I think, and Chiron Learning as well. And it's kind of all the ones I said.
Okay.
And
So
I
we
would
can
say
check those
PlayLab
out.
is great. Check them out. But yeah, PlayLab is great for creating your own. And Step Up Tutoring is also great. And Got It Education, they have a pretty good math tutor.
It might be fun.
So I know that's kind of a mix.
Oh yeah.
But
I was going to say it might be fun, Jim, to get tutors together and then the Reading Writing Center tutors together and have them play with some of these and see which ones would be good. Like maybe just thinking out loud.
totally.
Yeah.
I think like demos and practice is such an engaging way to start to try things. So hopefully this is sort of just the beginning and scratching the surface. I'm around if you want to follow up about any of these things. And I think that trying a bunch of different tutoring tools would be such a fun way to get started.
Thank you so much.